important person in my life now is called my wife. When I met her, I was thinking to myself, right, that's the one I'm going to marry. Where should I do it? You know, and if your name is Guinness and the storehouse has just opened, well, better. So up we went, up to the top of Gravity. Down I get on one knee, and thankfully she said yes. What I didn't tell her at the time was this. The last Guinness to have got engaged in St James's Gate was Arthur in 1761, and his wife went on to bear him 21 children. I have to say, I do remind Mira quite often, actually, that we've only got 19 more to go. But that was also a very special night because it's also Ireland's oldest industrial estate. You know, and if you're a bride and you want to get married, isn't that the perfect place? So when we now have 2 children, and about 2 weeks ago, my eldest Aoife went to school, and to be honest, it brought back all the bad memories. It brought back all the teasing that you get if you've got a funny surname. It brings back all the questions about everything that everyone always assumes, you know, the answers to, which I never do. But I think of the nicknames, if you've got the surname Guinness, you know, guinea pig, that's, you know, every 5 minutes. Pint of plain. All my Irish friends are always calling me plain. Oh, but I think the worst, and Mr. Searson, this is directed at you, Murphy. If you really want to insult a Guinness, we will talk later, Mr. Searson.
No problem.
School reports were always a bit of a problem for me because I was never the brightest pencil in the box. But I remember I had an English teacher, aged about 12, and he wrote home one Christmas saying, I thought Guinness was good for you. He said, this Rory Guinness really isn't good for me. So, out of the advertising, all the Guinness, all the amazing adverts that's been through the years, you can imagine what happens when the friends get hold of that. I think my sisters growing up in Dublin in the 80s had it pretty bad because, you know, they'd be out on the town, they would be cavorting, they'd be having fun, and then they'd be greeted by the bus shelter that was screaming at them, take a Guinness home tonight. And to add insult to injury, there was the marketing department who came up with something even worse. Share a Guinness tonight, just between friends. But when I was in my free years, in the 1990s, Diageo Guinness got hold of St Patrick's Day in a meaningful way and began to do something out with that. And I have to say, St Patrick's Day is a memorable night for everyone in this room. But if you've actually got the surname, it takes on a completely new scenario, because I remember being in a pub in Manhattan, and I've got the badge somewhere. Anyway, the excitement that I got out of wearing a badge saying "tall, dark, and handsome," or even better, "ask for me behind the bar." So, if there was a secret, I think, coming out of Guinness and out of what I learned from my father about brewing, and my main job is in investment management. What we do is we look after people's money. We do not do anything to do with Diageo on a daily basis. I guess I should mention my book. I'll pass it around. I was asked by Diageo, I was asked by the Storehouse to do a little guide, a family guide to Guinness and its history. I did that last year, and I have to say, it brought back a lot of memories, it brought back a lot of history, it brought back, to me, the importance of people in the scenario, you know? So if I'll just pass these round. You pass them round. So Catherine, who you met early, I have to say I rate enormously highly, because she is somebody who shares with all her colleagues at the storehouse a lot of the history, a lot of the passion for Guinness. And I think what we're seeing today is that it's very true. You know, big corporations can sometimes get it wrong. They can be soulless places, and it's very true that Diageo isn't always right. But it's also very true that there are good people floating around. And I think out of the Guinness, I'm thrilled to see that there's such a centre of Guinness importance, not just for the sake of Guinness, but also for Ireland and Dublin. It is such an enormous success. But and that really goes back to the heart of the matter. You know, if I think about Guinness, what is Guinness special? What makes Guinness special for me? And it really is about the people. And it's about Catherine, who's there representing the storehouse. It's about having great people, meeting visitors walking in. It's about what you guys do so well. And that's a funny thing about Guinness, is that Arthur was a publican. The original Arthur Guinness was a publican. He knew the licensed trade. He ran a pub in Leixlip for, I think it was about 8 years, after his boss left him a couple of quid, before he went and bought James's Gate. And so the whole kind of ethos of the family has been one about people, it's been one about incorporation, and it's been one about looking after them, looking after people's needs. And I think perhaps that message, I think, sometimes gets lost. And that's why it's brilliant to meet you all today, because in a funny way, you're part of, you're ambassadors for not just brands and your businesses and your families, but for my family. And I am indebted to you as a Guinness and as an Irishman to think that you're there representing Ireland and hopefully good pints in your local communities. And that is a very important privilege for me to be able to say thank you to you for doing such a good job. And after all, this country has been through seventh hell and back in the last couple of years. You know, we've seen awful things happen on so many fronts. But here's a gem of an idea, the Irish pubs idea. Here's the gem of getting people together about letting people talk freely to each other, hopefully about having some fun, even more hopefully about drinking lots and lots and lots of Guinness. Sorry, Mr. Searson.
No problem.
But above all, connecting. And so thank you for listening to me. I would be delighted to talk about anything you want me to talk about, such as philanthropy, advertising, family history, how awful Diageo is, whatever it is, either now or later, depending on time. Mr. Searson.
Just to point out that we are celebrating Arthur's birthday with a free pint of Murphy's. We're the only Irish pub in the world doing it. The only Murphy's Irish pub in the world doing it. So we do respect the great man.
I'm delighted to hear that. I'm not sure how much you respect your customers' health. If you're talking politically, let's leave politics to one side for a second, because actually it's the politics thing that's amazing. From a management perspective, Guinness was the first company I think, in the world, but that gets disputed, who actually introduced things such as paid leave for workers. So basically, if a labourer took a holiday, took a break, if a labourer had somebody die, had to go to visit the funeral, whatever it was, the labourer would know that he was coming back to a job. That was one of the initial 1840s is the first record of paid leave. And then that started to grow into free healthcare and so on and so forth. And politically, I think the story is even more fascinating because, although Guinness is always seen as being a great employer, it's also a very liberal employer in terms of the fact that, the number of... my father, for example, was one of the first to beat down the doors of sectarian Dublin to get, I'm not joking, a Catholic on the board of Guinness. And that was a big moment, both for Ireland and for Guinness, So it's the promotion of equality, I think, that runs throughout the history of the company. On a practical level, free healthcare, paid holidays, looking after widows and orphans of deceased employees, but also mentally and philosophically a very liberal one in terms of promoting equality both amongst women and every other creed out there. Anything else? Go on, tell me about Diageo.
You talk to them.
I will. But tell me about Diageo, honestly. Yeah,
Can I ask a non-Diageo question? Why didn't you go into the brewing trade yourself and keep the great tradition going? And then we'd be dealing with you and not Diageo.
If you were dealing with me, I'm not sure I'd be standing here. My father died in 1992, having been chairman for 32 years. In that time, when he took on the chairmanship of Guinness, about a decade before, there was a survey done that said that Guinness and associated companies were responsible for about 3 in 10, the welfare of 3 in 10 within Ireland. I.e., and there was a big responsibility with that job. And he grew Guinness from being a Dublin-London brewery into a fully international brewery that's operating as comfortably in Africa as it is in the Caribbean, as it is in Southeast Asia. And he did a lot of that great work. But he realised that the cost that the cost at which he had undertaken that work, and he always made my brother Ned and myself promise that we would never ever work for the family company, because it was a public company, it was a growing company, and he wanted us to have our own lives. Needless to say, what do children do? They don't listen to their parents. So is there one thing that I love doing? Well, it's getting out there and talking about pints. Anything else? No? But yeah.
Deirdre's mine from Dublin. My dad's been in the business 50 years, and I just hear people talking about Diageo worldwide. I'm on the LPA in Dublin, and obviously we've got a very strong context with not just Diageo, but mine. But I know from my father's perspective, and from, I call the old boys in the suits in Dublin, that when Guinnesses were running the show, there was a very personal relationship between them and their representative. The publican was king, I suppose. I worked in financial services for 12 years, so Diageo is global. It's a huge company, and I think people just think that they don't treat things as they should, as the important brand that we see to be, maybe here in Ireland and across Irish pubs. Now, in saying that, we work very closely with Diageo. You can't work without Diageo, I believe, in Irish pubs especially. But I think that's just the transition that's happened over the last maybe 40 to 50 years, when the publican was king.
I quite understand. And what frightens me on a personal level is the rise of the multiple, because I can see the importance of the publican in the community as a social service. And if suddenly you've got, the supermarket that's discounting bulk purchases, whatever, you're removing one layer of supervision from the drinking world at the same time as you are possibly removing a layer of social integration. So on a personal level, I agree. I think, though, that Diageo has done a lot of very good things for Guinnesses. Honestly, I'm not sure that Guinness, the old Guinness, would have had the balls, for want of a better word, to build the storehouse. That was the first item of capital expenditure that was on Diageo's first board meeting, and it was approved. So now that's something that's feeding not just the Irish name, that's feeding not just the Guinness world, but that's good for Dublin tourism, and that's great for the image of the brand around the world. So at the same time, Diageo are also negotiating with all these multiples, better shelf space for Guinness and this and that and the other. So I think it's a very multifarious organisation. Anything else? Come on.
If we're to believe the reports, sales of Guinness in Ireland are down 8% year on year. So we would say that over the next 12 years or so, we'll continue there'll be no more Guinness. But do you think that's directly related to the pullback of Diageo around that personal service, and maybe there's a direct correlation between Diageo pulling back, sales going down? Is that something you think?
That's the joy of not having to work in Diageo, is that I don't have to answer that question. What's next? Sorry, the history of Guinness has been
perfect wine. It's always been the focus, it's always been the mainstay, how to get it, how to deliver it across the global empire. And now it seems that Diageo are more concerned with volume. And like you're saying, Tesco's and blah blah blah, multiple outlets, blah blah blah. Surely that's deviating from the brand, where we're talking quality, subsistence, family, tradition. And now you're cheapening that product, and therefore cheapening our experience. I was a pub owner, global, blah blah blah. By Diageo just saying, what, you can get for $2 here, why would I possibly pay $5 in Coke? And for me, it's in the core of Diageo. Numbers, volume. Whereas the reality is, we're talking perfect wine. Otherwise I drink Budweiser or you.
It's a great product, yeah. I personally think the pint now is as good as it's probably ever been, both in terms of the bottle and the can, and in terms of the draft and the malter and the FES and you name it. Honestly, I haven't.
So you're saying stay at home and drink at home.
I'm saying enjoy it wherever you want. It's the customer who's going to decide that. I'm not going to tell anyone to go anywhere. But I hope that the product that they're getting is as good as it ever has been. It's incumbent upon pub owners to get the offering right. And brewers, we're only humble souls. I could never operate a pub, I tell you that. Anything else?
I think if you talk about the Diageo thing, something that we've seen in the U.S. is that you're in a room full of Irish pub owners who pour the pint properly. They are in love with Guinness more so than Diageo is in love with Guinness sometimes. I think that's what the pub owner feels, is that 10 years ago there were quality testers that would come out to your pub and make sure you were pouring a pint properly, and that went away. And then and obviously what Diageo has done is they've seen where the market cap is on Guinness, where their growth's going to be, and they try to make as much money as they can on Guinness. But I think what we've seen, if you do have an email that goes over to Diageo, is that the core group of pubs, and I think both Europe, Ireland, and US, that take great pride in pouring Guinness, don't get the support they need to help continue that enthusiasm in terms of what the pint is. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that we've seen is support. So much so that I recently opened a pub and the distributors in the area didn't have enough Guinness glassware. Yet we're supposed to pour it in a perfect pint glass, but you can't even get the glasses anymore. And that's when you start to see the quality really.
That's silly. Exactly.
Yeah,
that's silly. And that's bad business as well. Excuse me for saying so. because you want to be pouring the best pint, and you know, the guys in charge should be making sure. All I can say is take one of these leaflets. You know, my dear publisher produced these, hoping that you guys were going to buy cartloads of The History of Guinness by Rory Guinness. But it does have on the back my email address. So when it comes to Diageo horror stories, when you're not getting the right glassware, whatever it is, just drop me a line, yeah? Or get in touch with Catherine, who you've met, you know, and let's see what we can do. I can't promise anything, but what I can promise is that somebody will hear about it.
Rory, could I broaden it out slightly? I think, you know, the name Guinness drink is synonymous with pubs, but I read, it was your suggestion, Rory, Joe Joyce's book, which was the history of Guinness and the Guinness family. And I think we've got to, if we could make the discussion bigger, you know, rather than, which of course the narrow focus, the pint. The whole, we're trying to define here in this few days, you know, what are we? What is that pub culture? The Guinness isn't important, there's only one part of it. While Rory is here, we're talking about 250 years of Irish history. It's the oldest, and Rory, it's also a burden, I think, the responsibility of probably the oldest Irish family. So when you read through that, you read through politicians, philanthropists, big word, sailors, adventurers in the jungles of Africa, the Eglinton Canal here in Galway was built so that the Guinness yachts could get up to Ashford Castle. There's an extraordinary story, and I think, Rory, perhaps you could elaborate a bit more on. I know the pint and the pint and the pint. If you could talk about that side of the Guinness legacy, and I think that's important in contextualising the pub.
When you're born with the name Guinness, you're born with a lot of jobs. So, you know, I sit on the board of the Ivy Trust, and the reason that I sit on the Ivy Trust is because my great-grandfather started it, and basically it's Dublin's largest social housing provider. And what we do is we've got estates looking after older people, we've got a hostel looking after men who might find themselves without a bed tonight, and we've got loads of just general needs housing for, you know, you, me, anyone who finds themselves with a family or without in need. And that is a great responsibility, looking after that organisation itself. But it's awful to say it, but it comes back to the same thing. Because if I'm talking about pints or if I'm talking about investment management, it's all about knowing your market, knowing where you are, knowing that you're doing the best by the people that you should be looking after. And I think without going into too much detail about all the philanthropic activities of previous generations, all I can say is that I love it when I'm walking down Grafton Street in Dublin, and if I've got a couple of posh banker friends, if I'm greeted by a guy who might not look quite as smart as them, to put it politely, should we say he might look slightly hard done by, and if we're addressing each other on first name terms, I love that. That gives me a thrill, because I know that I am getting acknowledged by the guy who hopefully we're looking after down the road in the hostel. Now, quite often it inspires a bit of surprise from my posh banker friends, and I think that's one of the problems of having a brand name for a surname, is that people always expect you to live on yachts and have helicopters and this and that. I wish I did, but actually we're all just human beings, and at the end of the day we can only do our best to live up to the expectations of previous generations, as well as hopefully carve a niche for ourselves. So in terms of pressure, Enda, I agree with you. You know, it is an enormous responsibility, but I then get to meet all you guys, you know, and I would never meet you guys if I didn't have that surname. So thank you again for the opportunity of seeing me today, and great to meet you. And thank you, honestly, for being ambassadors for us all in Ireland and as Guinness people. Sorry, Mr. Searson. Thank you, for doing your part in your community, because Ireland needs you, Guinness needs you now more than ever.
Can I would just like to make a few comments, if I may. First of all, this is not a comment about Diageo or Guinness. The reality is Guinness has become part of what we are, as you say in your ads. Guinness is so much an Irish product. The first thing that should have happened is it should never have been left outside the control of Irish people. Guinness should never have been bought by Diageo. But Guinness is obviously a marketing company, so they have to do what is right with their shareholders. So they didn't do anything wrong. But in actual fact, our government did something wrong. They should have done something about it. So Guinness should have been 100% owned by Irish company. That's what should have happened. And there's a little lesson in this for all of us. We are at the present time, over the last 10 years or so, we're letting two other establishments lead the control of our country. One is we're closing what is essential to Irish communities. We're closing our small post offices. And we are standing idly by and doing nothing about it. And they're an essential part of Irish community. In the same way as we're speaking here today, if yesterday and today are the same for the last 2 years, 2 pubs have closed in Ireland, yesterday and today, and we're not doing anything about that. And we are introducing laws which are not very well informed laws, which are contributing to the closure of Irish pubs. And we are allowing other laws to be passed relative to tax, and we are allowing people to destroy Irish pubs by the way supermarkets use Guinness and other alcoholic problems to absolutely promote other products and services, and we are all standing idly by. Now there is a role for this new organisation, as indeed there is for the Irish Ventures Association and associated bodies, to actually start doing something positive about these things. It'll be too late. We let Guinness get out of the control. No fault of Guinness's. Your father or your shareholders have to do what was best for your company and for your shareholders. And it's gone outside our control. There's very little, with all due respect to you, there's very little you can do about Diageo at the moment. And in fact, Diageo sees Guinness as just another product. There is no love of it, there's no identification with it, and there never will be, as there was when Guinness was owned in Ireland and it was the main product now. So we have a problem here, and it's a political problem. And it's happening not just with Guinness, it has already happened with Guinness. It's happening with our post offices, and it's presently happening with our pubs in Ireland.
Mm-hmm. Very good points, well made. And all I can say is that there's some great people at the top of Diageo, and the irony is that sometimes if you catch them off their guard, they call themselves Guinness people. And anything else? Anyway, thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for putting up with me. My contact details are here, so give me your drop me an email when you're getting worried about anything, and buy a couple of books if you want to keep my publisher happy. And a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much.